Hi folks, and welcome to my first impressions of 303 Squadron Battle of Britain, a World War II combat flight game that has recently gone into early access and is currently available on Steam. Now obviously the game is set in the Battle of Britain and is based around the exploits of 303 Squadron, who were made up of free Polish airmen who'd managed to get to Britain after Poland was defeated by the Nazis at the start of World War II. The game is as much about telling the story of these airmen as it is just about the flight combat as well, and I think actually the story element may be the stronger part of the game. So I do need to point out before we watch any further that the game is in early access still. There's a lot of work needs to be done, so if the following footage looks and sounds awful, well, cut it some slack. It's still in development, and hopefully by the end of that it will look and sound a lot more finished and polished. Now, having said that, if you like what you see here, you can watch my first few hours playing of this over on my Let's Play channel, linked down below. So the game is split into two main parts. There's the story missions, which are based around the actual exploits of 303 Squadron encounters during the Battle of Britain. And there's also an open world section. And when we say open world, what I really mean is open aerodrome section, whereas you can actually travel around the airfield that the squadron was based on, and go into the buildings, you can go into the hangars, you can supposedly work on repairing your aircraft, and you can talk to other members of the squadron and get their story. Now, I quite like being able to travel around the airfield on a bike. I think it's one of the more fun aspects of the game, and you can do daft little stunts and stuff on it. But talking to the squadron members, whilst it's good to get the story across, I think the voice acting currently...
So, you need customizations. Good.
I'm hoping is just a placeholder, because it sounds like it's just been synthesized on some awful computer program and had a Polish accent applied to it. Yeah, it's not that good, and I'm hoping that's just a placeholder while it's in development and they're going to have some real voice acting come through at the end. Parts of the airfield are currently locked off, you can't access them, and they will be opened up as development progresses. But let's get on to the combat missions, which is probably what most people are going to be interested in about this game. When you start a mission, you've got the option of choosing arcade or realistic mode. Arcade is actually very simple to fly around with. I use the keyboard and mouse mostly. It's just point the mouse where you want to go and your plane will turn in that direction. You don't have limited ammunition, and generally the game plays pretty well. On realistic mode, however, you are limited to a cockpit view, and whilst it does look pretty nice, I found this incredibly awkward to control. It's very important to point out that currently the game doesn't seem to support a flight stick, which is a big no-no in a flight combat game, and hopefully the support for something will be added in further through development. I think that's pretty important. The developers really need to put that in, but maybe it's just me, but it wouldn't recognise my Thrustmaster flight stick, so I couldn't get that to work. I tried playing realistic mode using a gamepad controller, and the controls felt absolutely horrendous. Very twitchy, but at the same time, very unresponsive, if that makes sense. I couldn't get the plane to turn and roll and yaw as I wanted it to. It was far too awkward. You can adjust the sensitivity on all these settings. That is a pretty good thing. But overall, I really struggled to control it, especially with mouse and keyboard. It was very twitchy on the keys. So realistic mode for me is a bit of a no-no at the moment. I found the controls just made it pretty much unfun to play, but hopefully that will be ironed out, because I did think it looked pretty cool in that mode. Oh, I should point out that even in realistic mode, it's not that realistic, because the damage model is kind of funky in this, and you can also reload your machine guns when you run out of ammunition, so I don't think it's trying to be too realistic in things. It's not like a full-on flight simulator, it's more just like a story-driven flight combat game. But playing in arcade mode, I actually found quite enjoyable. Yeah, the graphics can be spruced up a bit, but as I said, this is early access. There's time for the developers to do that before release, if they plan on doing it at all. And I found it relatively easy to control this mode using the mouse and keyboard, and not even just easy, I found it pretty fun and entertaining. Now, the hitboxes on some of the aircraft can be a bit funky, especially as you get up close, where it just looks like you're firing through them completely. But that might be some issue I had with the setting of the harmonisation of the guns, and if you're not familiar with that term, it just means at what point all the machine guns in your wings converge in front of you, i.e. would they all hit a bullseye at some distance in front. You can set that in the hangar to be converging at a close distance, a long distance, or various levels in between. The game does have settings that it recommends for new players, but up close I found that I could absolutely just lay into an enemy plane and hit nothing whatsoever. It was like they were passing through. So why that was, I don't know, and whether that will continue through development, I don't know. I guess we'll see when we revisit the game a bit later on. It also has a kill cam mode. Is when one of your bullets strikes a critical part of the enemy plane, typically an engine or the ammunition in the wing, something blows up or catches fire, and the action pauses, and we follow the bullet travelling through the air and into the enemy plane or pilot or whatever it's hit, and having its effect. It is kind of cool to see that in some instances, but it does seem to slow the game down, and you're always aware of what is your plane doing in the meantime. Well, I think it just seems to pause in mid-air, because I haven't had any collisions or crashes or being shot down whilst watching a kill cam view. I quite like the effect, so we'll see where they go with that one. I do have to say though that these missions are tough, in the sense that you have to complete the entirety of a mission, otherwise you start it again from the very beginning. So if you have to shoot down several waves of enemy planes, you have to get every last one, and sometimes there's a time limit on some of them, like you have to stop the bombers before they reach their target, and if you don't complete it, doesn't matter how many waves you've already got through, it's all the way back to the start. I find that very challenging, bordering on an annoyance, I've got to say, because you find yourself repeating the same few stages of a mission. Like there's one I'm currently stuck on where I just cannot get the last bomber shot down in time of the, I think it's the third or maybe fourth wave, by which point you've got enemy fighters swarming all over you, and you've taken damage throughout the rest of the mission, and it's just hard to survive. And whatever happens, whether I run out of time or I get shot down or I collide or whatever else, I have to go all the way back, and I find that kind of frustrating. Yes, it's good to have challenges in these things, but maybe a checkpoint halfway through that mission or something, or maybe after each wave, maybe that'd be too much, I don't know, but I do feel like the game would benefit from having a checkpoint in the mission if it's not going to focus on full realism. For example, I thought, well, maybe we can just let the bombers bomb the target and then the story will progress, as in we failed that mission, or the airfield's been blown up or something like that. Something would happen like you would in a campaign on a real flight sim, but no, it just failed the mission and I had to do it again. So either way would be fine, but either way they want to develop that, whether they add it in so you can fail missions but the story progresses and you can maybe get a campaign score at the end, or I think they should put a checkpoint halfway through the mission, because it is tough, bordering on annoying for some of them, and I can imagine players getting a little bit sick of that pretty quickly. Okay, so let's sum the game up in its current state. Now, I just want to point out once again, in case you missed the message, this is in early access and it is not a finished product. Hopefully the graphics and the audio are still going to be improved, and there's probably a lot that can be done to tweak the gameplay as well. And the game does need a lot of work. The voice acting is absolutely horrendous.
Donald, it's Major Kellett. We are at war, and the English are in charge here. You want to face a massacre, or have hot tea poured into your trousers?
And it sounds like it's been done on a computer, and I do apologise to any actor's feelings if I am wrong in that, but it really does sound pretty bad, and hopefully it's just a placeholder and they're going to put some proper voice acting and voiceover in at the end. Graphics likewise do need some work. There's some issues with textures, especially on the ground section where you're cycling around the airfield. There's bits of layers of stuff floating above the floor and it just doesn't look quite right. And the combat and the controls definitely need some work and some tweaks here and there, but it's all stuff that the developer can add and improve upon. So what's good about the game? Well, the ground section, cycling around the airfield, is kind of interesting at first, but again it almost feels kind of pointless to the story, and you often find yourself just cycling from one end of the airfield to the other just to progress time, to go to sleep and then progress to the mission the next day. However, I do really like learning about the pilot's characters and history. When you complete a mission, you get a new pilot card, and you can go and read about the history of that pilot, what they did in the war, what they did after the war if they survived it, and it's got the information there. I kind of feel like this is the main point of the game, to tell the story of 303 Squadron and the Polish pilots, and presumably ground crew maybe as well, who served in her. Perhaps it is a part of the Battle of Britain's history that isn't well enough documented, and the game's developers decided, well, that story deserves to be told. And I totally agree with them as well. So by telling the story like it does, mission by mission, where you unlock a new pilot card, I feel like the game is trying to tell the story of the entire squadron and the pilots, and I think that's good. I think that's where the most interesting aspect of the game lies at the moment. So would I recommend buying this at the moment? Well, unless you happen to be a die-hard Battle of Britain fan or a particular fan of the Polish Air Force, then no, I would hold off a little bit because the game does need quite a bit of work yet. But it's certainly one that I would add to your list if you like flight combat games, flight sims, history games, Battle of Britain era stuff. The last Battle of Britain game I played that was any good was Their Finest Hour on the Amiga, and that is about 20 some years ago, but I really enjoyed it. It was bordering more towards flight sim than this is. This is more sort of arcade action, but that was a good game, and I haven't played a really good one since, even though I probably have been some around, I just haven't found them. But buying any game in early access is always a risk because you never know if it's going to get finished. And even if it does get finished, you never know if it's going to get finished in a good way. But so far, I see some good things in this, and I see an awful lot of work that still needs to be done. So I would definitely keep it on your radar for the sort of game that interests you. Keep an eye on it in Steam, keep an eye on the developers, patch notes and everything else. And if at some point you think it looks like it's going to do the job, then that would be the time to buy it. But I don't feel that that time is just quite here yet. So that's it for this video. Do feel free to check out my playthrough for a few hours of my first go at the game over on my Let's Play channel. I'll put the link down below. You can go and watch those if you're interested. And of course, let me know what you think down in the comments. And if you want to see more reviews of early access games or games that have just been released, then let me know what sort of games you're interested in, and I can maybe keep an eye out for those in the future. Alright folks, thanks very much for watching. Hope you found the video useful, and I'll catch you on the next one.